The warm aroma of freshly baked cookies filled the air, and the sound of children's laughter echoed throughout the house. It was a Sunday, and our family had gathered at my mother's house for our weekly get-together. It was supposed to be another afternoon of celebration, of shared memories and laughter, but little did I know that this Sunday would change everything. My son, Daniel, had always been a quiet and reserved child. At only 10 years old, he had a mind of his own, often lost in thought, observing the world around him. Unlike my younger niece and nephew, who were loud and full of energy, Daniel preferred sitting with the adults, quietly listening to the conversations around him. He was never one to follow the crowd, but there was something special about him that I had always admired. It was the kind of quiet wisdom that made him unique in a way I couldn't put into words. As the afternoon wore on, I noticed that my mother, Grandma, was in the kitchen speaking with my aunt. I could hear their conversation from where I was sitting, but I wasn't paying close attention until I overheard something that sent a chill down my spine. "He's not one of us," my mother said, her voice low and almost dismissive. I froze, turning to look at her. My heart sank as I realized she was talking about my son, Daniel. My mind raced, and I found myself unable to process the words. Was she really saying this about him? The son I had raised with love and care, the one who was so thoughtful and sensitive, the one who had always been my pride and joy. I stood up, moving closer to the kitchen, but before I could speak, Daniel walked in from the hallway. He was carrying a plate of cookies, his small hands gripping the edges. His face was calm, but I could see a flicker of confusion in his eyes. He had heard Grandma's words. It was evident. But what struck me the most was the way he handled the situation with a maturity that none of us had expected. "Grandma," Daniel said, his voice steady and clear, "I'm one of us." The room fell silent. Everyone stopped what they were doing, turning to look at him. My mother's face went pale, and the color drained from her cheeks. Her eyes darted from Daniel to me, and she opened her mouth to speak but couldn't find the words. The tension in the air was palpable. It was as if time had stopped, and for a moment, the entire family held its breath. Daniel stood in the doorway, holding the plate of cookies, his small form radiating a quiet strength. It was as though the weight of the world had been placed on his shoulders, yet he didn't falter. His statement had cut through the room, piercing the awkward silence that had descended upon us all. "Daniel, sweetheart," my mother began, her voice trembling slightly. "I didn't mean it like that." Daniel didn't let her finish. His gaze was unwavering as he took a step closer. "Yes, you did," he said, his tone calm but full of conviction. "You said I wasn't one of us. But I am. I am just like everyone here, Grandma." The words he spoke were simple, yet they carried a power that I couldn't ignore. It was as if Daniel had somehow, in that moment, become the voice of reason, the one to speak the truth that everyone else had been avoiding. Grandma's face flushed with embarrassment. I didn't mean to hurt you, Daniel," she stammered. "It's just that you're so different. You don't act like the others. You're quieter, more reserved." Daniel didn't flinch at her words. Instead, he stood tall, looking directly at her, and said, "Different doesn't mean I don't belong. Everyone here is different in their own way. I'm still your grandson, and I'm still a part of this family." There was a long pause before my mother spoke again, but this time, her voice was softer. "I didn't realize how much my words would hurt you, Daniel. I'm sorry." But the damage had already been done. The words had been spoken, and the tension in the room was undeniable. My mother's face was filled with regret, but I could see that she didn't fully understand the gravity of what she had said. It wasn't just about being different. It was about how she had made Daniel feel like he wasn't worthy of being part of the family, simply because he didn't fit into the mold she had envisioned. I walked over to Daniel, kneeling down to his level. His eyes were steady, unflinching. He had spoken his truth, and now he was waiting for the world to understand it. "I'm proud of you, Daniel," I said softly, placing a hand on his shoulder. The room remained quiet for a moment, as everyone processed the gravity of the situation. I could see the shame in my mother's eyes, and I knew that this moment would change her forever. She had seen her grandson, whom she had always adored, stand up for himself in a way she had never imagined. For the next few days, the atmosphere in the family was strained. Grandma, although deeply sorry for her words, was still processing the shock of it all. She had never seen Daniel's quiet strength before, and now she was forced to confront her own prejudices. The family gathered again the following Sunday, and this time, things were different. The air felt heavier, but it wasn't filled with anger or resentment. It was the weight of understanding, of acknowledging the mistakes that had been made. Grandma approached Daniel after everyone had settled down, her face sincere. She looked him in the eyes, and with a soft voice, she said, "I was wrong, Daniel. I should never have said what I did. You are one of us, and I love you just as much as I love the others." Daniel smiled, a small but knowing smile. He nodded, accepting her apology without holding on to the past. He had already moved on, having found the courage to stand up for himself when no one else could. "It's okay, Grandma," Daniel said. "I'm just glad you understand." The rest of the family, who had been observing quietly, started to speak up as well. They expressed their support for Daniel, each of them acknowledging how they had overlooked his quiet strength, his unique way of seeing the world. Daniel had shown them something they hadn't known: they needed to see the importance of embracing each other's differences rather than rejecting them. In the weeks that followed, something shifted in the family dynamic. What had been a tense and uncomfortable moment became a catalyst for growth. My mother, who had always been set in her ways, began to see Daniel through new eyes. She took more time to listen to him, to understand the depth of his thoughts and feelings. But the most profound change was within Daniel himself. He had found his voice, and with it, he had gained a confidence that radiated through everything he did. He wasn't the quiet, shy boy anymore. He had become someone who knew his worth, who understood that being different was something to be proud of, not ashamed of. The family, too, began to embrace their own differences. Conversations became more open, more inclusive. No one was afraid to speak their mind or share their perspectives. And for the first time, I saw the true power of family not in our similarities, but in the acceptance of what made each of us unique. Years later, as I watched Daniel graduate from high school, I thought back to that fateful Sunday when his words had stunned the entire family. He had stood up for himself when no one else would, and in doing so, he had taught us all the most valuable lesson of all: that the strength of a family lies not in how alike we are, but in how we accept and love each other despite our differences. Daniel had become the person I always knew he was meant to be: strong, compassionate, and unafraid to speak his truth. And I couldn't be prouder of the young man he had become. And so, the legacy of that moment when Daniel stood up and stunned the entire family lived on, reminding us all that the most important thing in life is not to fit in, but to stand out with courage and authenticity.